Hi, I'm Roger. I'm going to be staying here. Toby, if you can just check that you pin the video. If you can't see the waving hand on about 50% of the screen, you're not going to see any of my slides. It's coming through the video feed, so just pin my image, and that can help. Toby, if you drop your video, it'll definitely help focus, shift the focus. While I'm chatting, I have got the chat open. This is very informal. I'm very happy to take conversations and questions. So throw them in the chat. I'll try and answer them either in the flow or jumping at the end. Yeah, this is a very pertinent thing. It's a very, I think, very close to my heart. I was actually working with a mentee today, and she had exactly this problem. I'm like, I just wrote the slides for this of what I was telling her. So, yeah, just to run you through that. So this talk is really just going to be about how to influence up, and it's how to shift from managing tasks into influencing strategies. And that's really what I'm going to be unpacking is what is the goal, what is the purpose of product management, and how you can sort of lean into that, even in environments that aren't product led, that aren't thinking forward, and that aren't operating within frameworks that allow you to do your best work. So that's kind of what we're going to unpack today, but very open to questions and things as you go. So as Toby mentioned, I'm currently CPO at OkHi. Before that, I was at Founders Factory Africa, which is a venture builder. I'm working with about 28 startups there. I founded a startup called Trickster. Before that, I had another venture builder called PlayLogix. We worked with 50 startups in 5 years. So all in all, I've worked with about 83 early stage product teams, Pan-Africa. And I work with a lot of early stage teams and a lot of people that are trying to set the culture, trying to manage that, all build entirely new products, which in a larger organization. So one of the most successful products we built was actually called Shift, which is a digital Forex wallet for Standard Bank. And it's now it's like one of the larger Forex products in South Africa. So I've done some big stuff, I've done some small stuff, and the problems that you grapple with as you grow through various stages, they manifest differently, but the principles are the same. And the value of what product can bring remains the same. So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Medium, all that stuff, just at Roger Nort, pretty much that everywhere. And when I was writing this mapping out this and trying to think about like, what is the message I actually want to land, I thought it's like really important to just like define product up front. And I think one of the things that kind of came up for me over and over is we have so many different definitions of product or what being product led means, specifically in across Africa, when the environments are much more nascent, and a lot less committed into the best practice or those sort of things. That's why the first world models kind of don't fall about. And so I thought, let me just like start this whole thing with just like what product means to you. I just reflect a little bit on like how you would define that and how you define the purpose of what it is as you do as a product manager. And to kind of answer this question, I kind of lean on this diagram was first done by Martin Erickson, who's the founder of Mind the Product. And he kind of said you're at the intersection of UX, tech, and business. I tweak that slightly differently. It's like UX is more the customer side, tech is the product, or is like the technical strengths or engineering, and the business is like is the value. And so really the UX is the value you create for the customer, the business is the value you capture as the revenue, and the technology is how you deliver that value and things. So the definition for product for me is to deliver customer value aligned with business strategy in a way that makes the business revenue by managing the technical constraints. And for me, the technical constraints are always constraints. There's always a limitation on what you can build and how you can build it. And that's starting to change with AI, and I think the emphasis will shift as we move, but the fundamentals remain the same. And so I'm going to keep coming back to this definition as to what it is when you're reflecting on an organization that is not in an ideal structure. Reflecting back on where it's weak will help guide how you can have the most impact across that organization. Because the PM role is really like at a lower level is like identifying which of those three pillars the organization is weakest at, and then you filling in the gap to be more of that, to ensure that equilibrium and that balance is actually happening. But I'll unpack that a bit more on the later. Because the reality is, or the thing is, like most of this like product theory is not our reality. That's not how we live. That's not how we're building product. It's not the organizations that we're delivering. And we have to, every day we're dealing with things like ogre culture, top-down decision making. We're living in organizations that are not product led, and I'll unpack the different types of variants of that and what that looks like. Very often across Africa, you see we're building far more feature factories. People are focused on the solutions that we need to deliver. And oftentimes people are kind of just here for the paycheck. Tech earns well, they're here to kind of do their bit, and they couldn't really be bothered about value delivery or overarching business value. And I think very often you get stuck with teams that just, they don't really care about what they're delivering. And in many cases, what this leads to, and in a business culture that isn't product centric and isn't thinking about the value, the understanding of the value of products or product practices, very often product managers end up actually just being project managers. You're shuffling tasks through a backlog. You're getting told what to build. You just break it down into tasks and project manage the delivery of that, and then kind of move on to the next task. And that is unfortunately the reality for far too many of us. And that's not, like, a lot of the ideal product methodologies and processes just totally fall apart in that environment. And so I hope that what I can bring today is a couple of actions and things on how to shift the perspective of where you currently are at, and not just thinking about that ideal, but working within those constraints. So to run through a bunch of these points, it's like the first thing is, like, you can think about this ideal of product and product with a capital P versus product with a small p, whatever the language jargon you want. But the reality is, as a PM, your first role is to deliver value against your current expectations. So a lot of what I'm going to recommend, a lot of like tips or things you can try that I'm going to suggest are sort of things you do over and above it. But you can't ignore the current expectations of the organization on you. And I think that's like the first thing you need to do is acknowledge that constraints, acknowledge that, hey, we are a bit of a feature factory. It's going to take me 6 to 18 months or 6 to 12 months to build a culture and show evidence to shift it away from that. There's activities I can do in order to demonstrate value, but it's going to take time. And in the meantime, I need to keep actually delivering what they want me to deliver. And I'm going to need to start carving out time to deliver things in more effective ways, or change the way in which I deliver things to be more product centric and to show the evidence of how that thinking adds value over the long term. And so that's just like sort of acknowledge that, like, a lot of these things I'm going to suggest are like things you add into the day-to-day delivery of your role against the expectation that you have in order to create that shift. And it's not, we're not working on ideal things where you can kind of ignore what your direct line manager is telling you and go off and do these other fantastical things that are theoretically right, but not actually what the business wants. And so the first list of a list that I unpacked, or first a couple of tips, is around like, how do you show the value of product within your day-to-day delivery? So without doing anything differently, how do you try and change, how you deliver in your current role, often a project management type role, in order to start demonstrating why product is valuable? And this is the biggest shift that I think, and you'll see this theme coming through over and over again. A lot of it, what it is like, I firmly believe that a product-centric mindset delivers disproportionate value. And by following product principles and having product approaches and methodologies and applying that thinking, you can deliver disproportionate value. And companies that do that tend to deliver disproportionate value. But right now, like, often what you need to do is kind of deliver that and show the evidence of how to lead people towards that. And so here's a string to a list of things. And that's just kind of like a lot of the tips that I have is around moving from where you are to what an ideal would look like, or closer to what an ideal would look like. And so the first thing is, like, every artifact that you need to deliver for the project management, or if you need to write a full scoping document, or if you need to like write user stories or tickets or whatever that is, think about, how would I do this in my ideal world as a product manager? And then how do I reuse and modify these artifacts? How do I fill out these templates in ways that actually led us to be more customer centric? How do I make sure that every user story that I write has a clear KPI and a metric or success criteria, or the hypothesis is defined in the details of the user story that becomes a ticket that I pass through? So we have, like, feeding in KPIs or measurement or tying into business strategy pillars. So as you're writing your PRDs, like it's not a business requirements doc. It's a product requirements doc. It needs to be aligned with strategy, with goals, with hypotheses. And so working within the templates that you currently have, try and feed in that kind of information, research, data, like why are we solving this problem? What is the data that shows it's a real problem? If business is so convinced we should be doing this, it should be pretty easy to find evidence that that is a good thing to do. Let me go and find that data and put that into the documents. And so change the templates you're currently working with to be more aligned with the principles of value delivery, value creation, hypotheses, testing, that sort of thing. And this is kind of building into that is start stating hypotheses and measurement for as much as you can. So every time you write a doc, every time you submit something, every time you write a scope or lay out options, always be adding hypotheses and measurements. It's like, this is what I think the effect of this is going to have, and this is how we're going to measure that. And the importance of doing that sort of thing is, even if you're wrong, you put a stake in the ground and then you can learn how you are wrong. Like, what did you miss in order to do that? And the more you do that, the better your judgment calls get around where that stake should be, around what the impact of this feature versus that feature is going to be. You're starting to build your product sense, but more and more, you're laying the breadcrumbs of evidence to show business of like, this is the impact that we're actually delivering. And here, as we're measuring, we're starting to talk about measurement, reviewing, we've got the hypotheses, we've got the measurement, we shipped it 2 months ago. Let me go and check that measurement and see if it actually had that effect. And so by at least having a stake in the ground, even if your hypotheses are totally invalidated or the measurement seems to be the wrong measurement, you'll refine that over time. But just starting the practice of communicating in that way with that language will subtly start to shift the conversations in the organization towards a more product-centric experiment hypotheses, like value delivery type methodology. And the most important thing is like, information is your currency. So specifically, if you're not in an executive or product leadership role that has like a say in what the strategy is, like you're controlling, you control a lot of the information that is getting bubbled up to what those people actually make information in and make decisions in. And I've heard many a story of people when there's been some kind of strategic argument and at a strategic level, and they go, well, oh, actually, I spoke to the customers last week and that wasn't a problem, this was a problem. And they're bringing qualitative or quantitative data into the conversations to help leadership make better decisions. But really where the product management role really shines is being the one that can find the information and get that information more effectively. And a lot of that comes from building bridges, from you checking in with the developers, checking in with the customer support teams, checking in with the customers or the marketing or delivery partners or whoever that is, getting more insights or more information in places where other people aren't getting information from, is what's going to give you the leverage in order to manage those conversations, in order to influence how those decisions are being made. And you're going to do that by building bridges and building like stakeholder management across the organization. And the third part of that is this concept of radiating information. Like, be the person that helps make the data visible across an organization. How was that last thing that you shipped? Write a weekly update of the business KPIs and share them in its public Slack channel. Be the one that's actually sharing information around project statuses, project updates, what's being released, what timelines are getting shifted. Like, the more you become the person that is like sharing the information, creating this holistic understanding across the organization, the more indispensable you're going to become in people going to you for information. The more they're going to come to you, the more they're going to see you as a critical part of holding this organization together. And so as people start making decisions off that data, and as you see those stats and those data, it's going to start reading it in the conversation. And if you're the source of that, it's going to start giving you much more influence over what data gets shared, how it gets shared, getting more information from other people because you're now giving them information that they didn't have. And that's really where you can start gaining leverage into what actually gets discussed and how decisions are being made. Because even in the older culture, like a top-down, they're still making decisions mostly of gut feel or some kind of signals. And so by radiating that information, you're starting to bias what their gut feel is actually measuring or what they're actually making the decisions on. And you're starting to influence that very subtly in a completely abstract way. And this is something you could start doing today. It doesn't require any permission from a boss or like any kind of sign off. It's something you can literally just start delivering on and start building that reputation in the organization. And the other thing that I see here, and I throw this in just for our Nigerian friends, is like very often people want to make it more about themselves and about their ego, and I shipped this feature and I did that. But what you'll find specifically as a product manager, like you're trading in relationships, you're trading in favors, and by always putting the other people on pedestals, but always making the other team members look smart, you'll inherently look even smarter. And I find this time and time again, where it's like, and I do this with my team, like I'll never put my name on like, hey, this KPI like a ship take, but I've got things like it's always this person delivered it, that person did, this person did great research, which drove this change that made the difference. And by doing that, by sharing that information or managing up, like giving the information, like saying, hey, my boss made a really great call and he did that. You might have done all the execution on that, but your boss will know that it was actually you. And other executives and other people will also know it was actually you. And when you're constantly the person, when the people around you are constantly succeeding, you're going to be the one that, as that boss gets promoted or as the organization grows, they're going to keep you close. They're going to keep you there because you're building the organization. And so you shift the focus as a PM away from you and what you deliver and more around how the team is delivering value and making others look good. You're more and more, you're going to start building stronger relationships. You're going to pull more of that currency that you can. And you actually get far further that way than having your name on that feature that shipped. Because the people at the top, the people that matter, they know who's actually delivering the real work, regardless of whose name's on the presentation or who gets the shout out. It'll always come through in the long run, specifically if you can deliver that consistently. And the other thing is always bring options. And this is the one thing that I find specifically in feature factories or in businesses that are like more solution focused, that we have this idea and this is what we need to build. One of the best ways of undermining that culture is to constantly give options, is to constantly lay out, say, okay, we want to do that. Spend a bit of time looking at, well, how else might we solve that problem? What are other ideas we can do that? You might still end up choosing to go with that first option, but by making it evident that there are other options, you can take the blinkers off the rest of the team. And often people go, oh, hold on, if there are other options, why are we choosing this? Now we're going to like, well, what is the data showing? And you're starting to like make decisions of value-based or value-based delivery of KPIs instead of I say this, you say that. And that's the important thing of like trying to never just give one option. So if your boss says, oh, we should build this, you can go like, well, what problem is that? Like think to yourself, what problem is that solving? How else might we solve that? It's come up with 3 or 4 options. That his is the one, here's some other ways of doing it, here's some pros and cons, lay that out, and then they can make a decision. It should be something that takes you particularly long. You don't have to go all the way and fleshing them out to the end of the world, but starting to just open people's mind up to what else are we actually ignoring? Because the problem when people have blinkers on is they often don't realize what they're missing. They don't realize what they don't see. And so if you're not running in an environment that has that values experimentation, that values optionality, that values evaluation and being data-led, it means you're always the strongest opinion is always going to win. And that's just going to be a single option of this is the only one that'll work. And so you can really try and find like, how do I find other options that could also be viable? What also makes them true? And starting to add that is going to start breaking apart the very product or engineering culture, which is generally very solution focused and not very problem or value delivery focused. And this is the one thing with like managing up, like specifically if you have a big man at the top, is you always let them make the choice, but you have a huge influence over what those options are. And in the moment, like by the time they've said we're going to do this, like that's too late. Your opportunity was 6 months ago or 3 months ago, starting to get ahead of where we're going, what might we need next, how do I start seeding options, how do I share like decisions, and one of the big like generally the guys on the top or the OkHi, whoever it is, could be a woman too. they love giving an opinion. They love being heard. They love being valued. And so you go into them saying, I'm having a bit of trouble trying to evaluate what other options might be. I'm thinking this, maybe that. Which one do you think is better and why? Or like, help me reason through how this would work. Well, they'll jump in and give you an opinion, but immediately, even them just giving you an opinion and shouting down other options is actually exposing them to that. And they're going to go back and think, well, hold on, maybe there are other options. Maybe there are other ways of doing this. And so as you start looking at shifting organizational culture, as you start shifting the way in which things are delivered, you have quite a lot of ways of influencing that through delivering options, through radiating information, through every time they say something, go back it up with data, and your data will either validate or invalidate it. And just finding things to like lean into more product-led, product-centric focuses. And one of the hacks that I have with like almost every single mentee or someone that I'm chatting to, like early stage teams, it's like specifically in engineering led or vision led, like founders often have this vision of like, hey, this is where I want to go. Or this is what we need to build. This is the gap that I've seen. And the saying that I typically have is like, all founders are a little delusional. And you kind of have to be to see something that other people can't see. That's literally the definition of a delusion. But data is how you don't get lost in the delusion. So leaning into data, specifically qualitative data, in the early stages of an idea, if a founder has incredibly strong conviction that something has to be true, it's even easier to test than if he's not sure. Or if something's like, we think there's a gap here, but we're not really sure. If he's like, this is definitely the case. It's like, doctors definitely have this problem. Great, let's find 5 doctors. And if 4 of them say this is a problem, you're totally right. If none of them say it, then we should probably question whether we're doing the right thing. And so the stronger the conviction, the easier it is to actually validate whether that's true or not, and to find the data to back that up. And the one habit that I find that many African or teams operating across Africa, this is like East Africa or West Africa, is they're just not speaking to customers enough. And what happens when the entire team isn't speaking to customers, the one person that is speaking to customers suddenly comes up when they're like, oh, we should build this, not that on the roadmap, or that's not important. It's like, well, I spoke to 5 customers and 3 of them really want that. And 2 of them said they would pay more if we actually shipped that feature. And this other thing you wanted to build, none of them mentioned that. So we should probably build this thing that's going to make more money for the business. And you can start bringing those anecdotes, and that's quality. I'm talking about qualitative. Quantitative is like a totally different story. If you have like hard evidence, they're like, hey, people keep clicking on this page and then it breaks and they leave. Like, we're losing this much revenue. If we fix that, we'll land that much revenue. You can quantify what is the money the business is going to make off that. And the one thing that I consistently find is that people aren't speaking regularly enough to customers, to like external stakeholders or support teams, like identifying what are people complaining about, what are they giving feedback on, where are people getting stuck, and then how do we use that to create the business case of how fixing that would make more money. And as soon as you can draw that parallel between identifying opportunity, mapping like how much would it cost to actually fix this and what revenue could it generate, once you can explain that little thread for pretty much any feature that comes through, and you're the one with the data and the insight, and the feedback on where to look for those things, like you're going to be far more indispensable than anybody else who's just shipping features, doing what they're told to do. And so the things, as you're implementing this stuff and as you're going through, like some general habits that I see, like some of them are cultural, some of them are person dependent, but very often people are complaining. It's like, oh no, my company, we don't have developer budgets. Developers are all focusing on other things. So I just have to wait until the developers are ready again. And that's like totally not the way to go about it. Go out, find the data, build the business case, and motivate for developers. Like that's the initiative that you can get. If you can go to any executive and show, hey, we're sitting on a gold mine here. If we just build this one thing that solves this problem for customers, here's 20 customers who have said they will pay X amount to deliver on this. I don't know an executive anywhere in the world that would not then at least allocate some resources to executing that feature. And so by putting together that structure, so like showing the evidence behind what it is, don't be complacent and sit there and say, oh, I'm just stuck in middle management, the leadership doesn't want to do this. There's so much that you can deliver by just changing your actions that starts bubbling up and changing the environment around how the conversations are happening in an organization, how decisions are getting made, and what you can do. Another fault that I see is people waiting for perfect, like the same thing with hypotheses, like, oh, I don't know if that's the right thing to track. Who cares? Track it anyway, and you'll see when you're wrong, why you're wrong. If you say, hey, I thought this was going to be important, I thought it would jump by 10%, thought we would increase activations by 10%, we actually decreased churn by 2%. That's unusual. Why did that happen? Like now you know where to actually look and what the signal is. So just doing something is almost always better than sitting waiting for like this perfect plan of all the data in order to make that. And another thing I often see with gatekeepers is people sitting on gatekeepers, they're trying to become the bottleneck. They're like, oh no, I want to be the one that makes all the decisions. And the problem then is you start hoarding information. When you're not hoarding information, you're not leveraging the currency you have to build the relationships and buy the influence that you need. And so you start getting stuck in this world where you think you're all powerful, but you're actually a big fish in a small pond, and you're not actually playing a much bigger game, and you're significantly holding back your career and being able to grow. And the best thing you can do as a PM, I believe, is to outgrow your organization. Say, I delivered so much value, I worked myself out of a job, and like I started getting to a point where I was delivering so much value that I want bigger problems to solve, and I'm going to move on to new opportunities. Like that's the kind of person that if you can show evidence of that the organization just didn't have big enough challenges for me, I'm looking for another big challenge. I delivered so much value and I want to leave anyway. Like that's the kind of person that new like organizations want to hire. Those are the PMs you want. And the other one is just don't ask for permission. And this is once again very often very big on a cultural thing. I see a lot of female PMs like holding back or like afraid to like step out, or they always want to just go check with their boss that it's okay that they phone these 5 customers. I can guarantee you it's okay to phone 5 customers. If you're worried about brand reputation, phone potential customers. People who aren't customers yet. There's nothing stopping you from speaking to your mother, your uncles, or things like phoning up smaller businesses or lower hanging fruit to gain that information that you need. Like there is no reason you can't phone up a random insurance company and say, hey, I'm trying to speak to this person, or hit someone up on LinkedIn, say I'm doing some research for a university project. Can we set up some time for asking some questions around how your claims process works? It's like you can totally do that, and people are far more open to have those conversations if you approach them in an open way. But don't sit back waiting to be given permission to do these things. Like if you're in an organization that isn't product led, that isn't leaning in on the principles that helps drive value delivery, it means that people at the top don't understand the value of that, so they're never going to give you the permission to do that. You need to actually go and do those things and show them the evidence of why this is benefit and why this is beneficial. And if you can't do that, you probably shouldn't be doing that. Like they shouldn't be letting you do the product-led things. They shouldn't let you do that if you can't show the evidence of why this way is better. Why should they change that? The onus is on you to go and find that evidence in order to do that. And so that kind of takes us to the next step, was like, if those are all the things that you can do in your current day, in your current role without changing the organization. And the next step is like, how do you shift the mindsets of leadership, of teams, of executive management around the value of being product centric, the value of customer centricity, the value of breaking down these silos between those 3 different areas. And the way I often like to look at this is like, there's a slightly different approach for every different organization, but there's a formula to it. And the formula is typically based on how the business decides what to build. So maybe reflect on this briefly now. Like, what was the last 2 or 3 or the last 1 big feature that you shipped? And what drove, just throw in the chat for me, why did they build that feature? Was it from a founder? Was it from leadership? Was it data from a customer? Was it because it was just obviously the next thing to build because you're building a replica or something and that's just the next feature we need? Are you doing it because the tech is cool and like you added this AI chatbot because the tech is cool and the dev team wants to play more with AI? Like, just type in the chat there, anyone. Let's get like 5 or 10 responses. How did your business make the last decision? What was the factor that made them decide that? Like, where did the inspiration come from? Research? Is that, Toby, is it online research or customer research? Like interviewing customers or desktop research?
Interviewing customers actually, and there is this physical NPS meeting. No, not physical. There's this virtual NPS meeting that we have every quarter, where they come to give us the results of the NPS scores. So that's sort of also influences the things that we put in the roadmap, because that's where we'll get the craziest feedback from customers. I mean, most disgruntled customers are always on that. They're always in that the slides for that meeting.
Okay. Cool. I mean, Jade says the founders and stakeholders, and that's another very common or very popular framing, specifically financial stakeholders. That's always a good one, which is being led by the business. And so if you think about those three spheres where product kind of sits at the center of, typically what we find in most organizations is they're highly skewed towards customer. They're being led by customer problems, they're being led by business problems, or they're being led by engineering tech. And so a lot of large organizations, should I say, that become large have often been started by technical co-founders, Paystack, MoneyPoint, those sorts of things. And the cultures there are very much engineering led. And so they're leading with, this is the solution we think we need to build. This is what we need to go. Or this is what we need to ship next. This is the obvious feature we need to add into our current suite of products. And the problem with that decision making is you're generally very solution focused and not very problem focused. And so the way in which you can start operating in order to try and shift culture and change the way those decisions are being made. The first step is to sort of measure outcomes, is to try and create like what is the value that's being delivered, not the KPI or the usage stats or the engagement metric, but what is the value metric that is delivering that. So not, oh, we shipped this feature, this is the impact it had, this is what it led to revenue, this is how it changed customer value, however you manage that in the thing. And so shifting what you measure to be more outcome focused instead of output focused will start to change the conversation about how decisions and trade-offs are being made. Another problem that you see very often when they're very solution focused is they have a hammer and everything looks like a nail. And there's only one way to solve all of those problems. And so by being intentional about always trying to test at least two options, like when you're shipping the feature, are you always shipping A/B tests? Like an original plus option A and option B, so that you're looking at three, so your variant, your baseline, and then you have two different variants that you're evaluating, or you're only evaluating one variant. Is this one thing we ship better than the thing? Or have we challenged ourselves to think, well, how else could we solve this? And can we build two options and evaluate maybe the one is significantly better than the one that you were planning on building? So how can you always be bringing optionality into the planning, into the testing, and into the research? And the other thing that you typically, if you think of those three segments, if the team is very internally focused and very focused on the engineering, they're very focused on what the solution is, what normally happens is the voice of the customer is not getting brought into those conversations. And so by you, like the role of the PM then to create a bit more equilibrium, create a bit more balance, is for you to be a louder advocate for customers, customer needs, understanding customers than you would be in some other situations. And so it's kind of the onus is on you to make sure that you're engaging at least on a weekly basis with any customers. And you're constantly touching base with them, that you have regular time slots set up, you have regular cadence and regular meetings with them. If you B2B, maybe once a month is good enough. But reaching out to like 2 or 3 or 4 customers once a month is still very recommended, even if you only have like 10 or 15 customers. Just constantly touching base with them, checking in, delivering that customer support role in a way to gain understanding and gain the customer's perspective that is probably missing from the way decisions are being made in the business. Another I think that's very often driven is to be sales led. So often the founder is like a great salesman and they'll go in and they'll sell a solution. And then like they go to the next customer, they sell a totally different solution, and they go to the next customer, they sell a totally different solution. And your dev team is constantly trying to add features and add these things to deliver against what's being sold. And so if you find yourself in that situation, a way to try and slow things down a little bit is to identify is to kind of build compounding solutions. So constantly be thinking about how do we break apart what we're building. So we're not just packing features onto this Frankenstein, but how do we break it down into components or modules that can be configured for the different ways in which it's being solved? How do we think about the principles that always need to be true, regardless of what new feature we tack on for this one customer? Or how do I build this one feature in such a way that I can then roll it out to all other customers? And so how do you make sure that every incremental thing you're adding, that or every new thing that's getting sold is making the core better, not making it more of Frankenstein, more tech debt, and harder to think. So slowing down, building in a more modular, more adaptable way means you're going to ship a little bit slower. But it also means that over time, you're going to start shipping a lot faster, because as new features come in, you can change the configuration on the old feature instead of building something entirely new. And so thinking about the principles of what's important of long-term success and for you to actually win, and then how do you construct this need into the architecture of the product and into the offering in a way that doesn't just add something on, that it actually builds onto the architecture in a more flexible way. Another thing that is often driven by like sales led, and the same thing for the next one, is they're often very certain. In fact, sorry, in the previous one with engineering driven or very solutions driven, is people like aren't very good at defining uncertainty, and they're not like a customer will say, "I've sold this," and like, tell me how long it's going to take. Like when you tell the developers, like, how long is this feature going to take to ship? And the problem is people aren't clear on what the uncertainty is. And so they're making all sorts of assumptions that, oh, this integrate, we just need to integrate to this service, it'll be easy. It's like, like as soon as you hear the word just, there should be a huge red flag that there's a massive assumption that's being baked into that estimation that is probably going to come back to bite you. And so so when you think about like, how do you define that uncertainty, and how I solved this at PlayLogix previously is I used to start estimating in ranges. So whenever they asked me for a deadline, I would give them a range. And it would say, oh, this would like building out this app would take between 6 to 12 weeks. And the customer's like, but that's ridiculous. Like, well, why such a big variance? It's like, well, now we're having the right conversation. Now we're talking about where the uncertainty is and like where we think things would go well. If in the best case, they might go here, but if these things are much harder to do, it's going to be a lot longer. So working with developers to give, we used to give 2 estimates. One is how long you think it needs to work. And then I added a multiplier for complexity and certainty. So if you're very certain, but it's very complex, we double the estimate. And so you kind of multiply by plus 0.5 plus 0.5 of whatever the original estimate was. And so by doing that and then adding up all the things we need to do, you're creating these ranges. So wherever the variance is biggest is where you know this is the biggest uncertainty. And often by trying to resolve that, the best way is, well, let's spend a little bit of money integrating with this API to remove that uncertainty. And once we know how to integrate with that API, we know that it's going to deliver the way the documentation says, we can then build the rest out, and that's much more certain. So helping make that visible is a strategy that can definitely work, specifically when things keep getting sold, and they're just brushing over the complexity or uncertainty. Another way of doing that is like concierging the problem. So doing things manually creating reports and uploading them, and manually like build a pilot, handhold the person manually through the process. And then once you've manually done something enough times, you probably understand it well enough to write the spec to automate it. But I can almost guarantee you, until you've done it, you've solved the solution a few times, you almost never understand the problem well enough or the specs well enough in order to automate in the first place. So you want to do it, document it, then automate. And so do it yourself, document it so that an intern can deliver it themselves. And then you've got the documentation to actually write the code and automate the solution. And the last one I'm going to cover today is kind of like business led or ogre led. So it's like the financial stakeholders are saying, hey, WhatsApp has this feature. You're trying to be a chat app. You should build this feature too. Or like you're coming from your investors or whatever it is. The best way to counter that is to be the customer's voice. Is to come with real data around your customers. Like, how are your customers different to whatever those are? How does that not add value, and what would add more value to your customers? As soon as you can push back with real customer experience, like once again, if you think of those 3 circles that you're supposed to be the integration of, what normally means is you're either they're overseeing, they're brushing over the complexity of the engineering, or they're ignoring the real data and value from customers. And so by bringing that in, you can create a bit more of a balance to be able to push back and shift the options. And tied to that is like bring the data, be the one that owns the data about everything they say you should do. Go and evaluate, does this actually make sense? What does the numbers say behind that claim? And then what are other options, and what does the numbers say behind those options? And let's push back with a few options saying, I'm not quite sure, like, I'm happy to do this. I did some data. It didn't seem like it's going to have that big an effect. I looked at some other things, and this might be an opportunity. Are you sure you still want to do this, or should we explore that other option as well? You can kind of bring them, ask them for advice, but in doing so, you're presenting the options, you're laying out the data. And often when people are very much like, the one thing about senior experienced business people, when they say like, just do it this way, normally where that's coming from, if I think about it in the most favorable light, it is coming from a whole bunch of experience. They've seen this problem before. They've solved this multiple times over and over. They've seen echoes of it in a similar problem space, and they're pretty sure that this is going to be how you need to solve this. But often they can't articulate that, like, as to why this is important. They're just like, this is what we need to do. And so helping them articulate the justifications behind that can be incredibly valuable, in the way that you add value to them and the way that you help them sense check and reason through that. Most entrepreneurs are delusional. Data is why they don't get lost in that delusion. And one of the ways to unpack those underlying things is just to keep asking why. Like, what is it that drives them? Like, what do you think that effect that's going to have? Why this option, not that option? And helping them like reason through it is going to help give the framework of why you should justify doing that, or help them understand where their biases are coming from, where their previous experience doesn't apply to the scenario, and help you unpack what other options might look like. So often just asking why is that. And so in short, like, information, understanding, and insights are your currency, not your title. And for most PM roles, like even PMs at like a leadership level, you're often pretty small teams, or compared to the rest of the organization teams. Like, it's not your title, it's not your it's not like what you say, it's what you show you can do, the information, insights that you have that other people don't have, and the insights or understanding or unique perspectives that you can bring is where people are going to start valuing you. And the more you can bring the business understanding and articulate that to the developers, and so this is why you're building this feature, is because this is how it makes us money. This is how it decreases our COGS and increases our margin, which is a 5% impact on our monthly revenue. Like, explaining that to developers are really smart people. Explaining that business reasoning behind why they build this feature is going to help them think into like, actually, you said we must use this service provider, but I think this other service provider will be even cheaper if you're trying to save COGS. And so they can start becoming thought partners. You're starting to build cross-functional teams, blah, 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 blah. And you're thinking more around like product-centric value delivery. And so the one action that I would recommend, like almost everybody, is just like to start doing today is just start rating its information. Share at least one insight or public post per week. Go to look back at a feature you shipped that you can change. Try and find one thing that you can share on at least a weekly basis to start building up that currency that you can do. It's a really simple task that most people just aren't doing internally, and then externally, obviously, go speak to customers. And so as you start influencing up, you really need to show, don't tell. It's not about you. It's not about your ego. It's about the value you can deliver. And the more value you can deliver, the more it'll become about you. Radiate information and don't ask for permission. Are my key takeaways from that. Thanks. And yeah, basically just go back to right at the beginning. Like, you'll see this echo, this thing coming through a couple of times. Is like, your focus is to deliver customer value aligned with business strategy while managing technical constraints. And generally, when organizations are skewed, the way in which you're going to have the most value, and the way you're going to be able to influence and shift the organization, is to find the pillar that is being least represented and be the spokesperson for that. Because that's what matters in product. And the advice that I'm giving here is like, yeah, it's like totally relevant in Africa and African centric, but it applies just as much in the UK. The principles, the way in which you deliver it, and the way in which you execute these will be slightly different. The language that you use, the evidence that you use will be different. But the principles and the approach behind how to influence this will be the same in any country, in any product team globally. Thanks. Not sure how that's a half page. Cool. That's me. Questions in the chat?
Thank you very much, Ruja. I would like to. Oh, okay, yeah. Hi, yeah. So you can really raise a round of applause with the emojis. And for me, I think one major thing that I've gained from this call is to always look at what's missing in the gap of what's in place in the company's strategy, and to make sure that you position yourself to be the voice of reason in that regard. Because, like you said, no Oga would, I need to, sorry. No Oga would, the Oga driven development, no Oga would respect what it is that you're saying if what you're saying does not have a backing. So if you're coming with reason, if you're coming with a couple of things for us to do, come with objectives or come with a logical standpoint why you think we should do that as well. No guy would go in the direction of what you're saying because it just fits the emotion or it's just got feeling.
Yeah, but most important, it also shouldn't just be your backing versus their backing. It should be like, I think this one's going to make us more money. Like ultimately, everything's like what ogres care about more than anything else is how does this business make money? That's what every CEO is like cares the most about. And if you can be the one, like you're not arguing from my perspective or his perspective or whatever it is. It's like, hey, I think this is going to make us more money. You think that's going to make us more money. Let's chat about that and let's find the best solution that's going to make the most money for the business. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about the business succeeding.
Oh, but by the way, when you were talking about making us more money, I was thinking companies that regard more money as shareholder value. I mean, maybe that's another conversation entirely because like would making us more money with respect to customers giving us more money or making us more money with respect to shareholder value increasing. But I think there's a question from Victor before I go ahead with that line of thought. Hi, Victor Williams, you can go ahead.
Yeah, hi, sorry. I will actually typing it on the chat box right now before you listen. Hi Roger, nice to meet you.
Hi, Victor.
Yeah, to touch on what you said about revenue growth. Yeah, how do you manage manage short-term revenue growth with long-term revenue growth when you're looking for buying from stakeholders, probably your internal team as well as management? So because management, first of all, depending on the company strategy, would want to potentially go for short-term growth. That's if they are if you pick about it, but very few would want to invest in product or initiative that would probably not be short-term profitable, but maybe on the longer term. So how do you manage that?
Why do you think that is?
Sorry?
Why do you think it is? Why do you think an executive team would value short-term revenue over longer-term revenue?
Well, for the most part, yeah, I think it will depend on the stage of the company. Yeah, for say for instance startups, yeah, depending on what they're just looking for revenue as soon as possible, probably meet their milestones and runway and whatnot. But on a longer, in a matured company that probably has a decent cash flow and strategy around that, and they just want to probably make more money about it, I think ultimately the stage of the company would determine if they invest in potentially long-term strategies as well as short-term revenue growth. But in this case, hypothetically, if you work in a startup that management wants short-term growth as soon as possible without necessarily having the infrastructure or the attitude to invest in long-term initiatives.
There's no point in investing in long-term initiatives that you did, right? If the company's going to die because you don't have enough revenue, like, of course they're not prioritizing long-term revenue. They need short-term revenue to stay alive. So, like, if that's the situation of the business, focus on short-term revenue is the right decision, right? So there's definitely a world in which short-term revenue could be the right decision. It could be that is what the executive strategy needs to execute for the business to survive. But often what happens when they're prioritizing short-term wins over long-term, either it's skewed incentives. So we see this quite a lot in like stock markets when they're in like quarterly earnings calls and they need to show impressive results over that period of time. Good CEOs for a longer period of time will show value over 18 months. Like as a CPO, I add value over 18 to 24 month time horizons. And I'm very clear around that. Like we'll do some short-term wins. We just made a fix, took us 6 months to ship it, but we jumped net revenue by 7% by shipping one change. And we had a net 7% conversion across the top end of the funnel. And so it's like, in some cases we do that, but me doing that was very much a strategy, like it's one block of a much longer strategy that's trying to push 30% revenue over a 2-year period. So I'm trying to push, like, increase our conversion rates by across various different parts, but in total by about 30% over the whole system. So I've hit 7%, it's one bump, but I'm focusing on the longer term. But I'm in an environment where I can do that. And the ways in which we make decisions allows for that. That's not always the case. And so by challenging that, it can be useful. What I do find when companies could be focusing on medium term or longer term, but they're not, it's often because it's too much uncertainty or nobody's actually sat down and just modeled it. As soon as you're like, hey, if we make this change, I think in a year's time, we could have X number of customers and we could double the revenue from customers. That's how much the annual revenue is going to be worth for this new feature, multiplied by a 5% increase this month. What is the revenue? What is our revenue projection for the year? What is 5% more on that? How does the revenue from option A offer, like, compared to option B? Let's weigh that up and let's look at what the cost and the investment is. And you're now looking at like RACI evaluations or like Moscow or whatever you want to, whichever framework you kind of use. But that's effectively what you're doing, is to say, we have a bit of time. We're going to spend time and money in order to build 2 features. In a year's time, which one's going to make us more revenue? And help them see the options, help them make better decisions. It's not about your decision or their decision being right. It's about you helping get the information or putting business cases together around why we should use option A or option B, or getting the data you need in order to put a more robust business case together.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you very much, Roger. There's a question from JJ, right, that I think would involve us speaking. Earlier, she mentioned that it's the founder of a company and the financial stakeholders that decide where the product goes. And she's a junior PM. So my question is, what can I do if I'm a junior PM in a team where my seniors are stuck in their ways and I can't bypass them? I think it may involve you asking a couple of questions.
So it's a couple of really simple actions. And like one of the things you can do, like you're probably in a very much a project management, project delivery type role. That's normally where most careers start. So the one thing is like carve out some time, an hour a day, 2 hours a week, 4 hours a week, whatever it is, to go chat, like go get customer insights, go chat to the customer support team, run the analysis on all the tickets, like look for trends, look for ways to provide information around the customer and how that's going. That would be like one action that you should be able to carve out of your time. Go and speak to customers, go sit in sales calls and jot down the questions that customers keep asking. Where do they push back? What is unclear? How can you learn something about the customers that you can share with the stakeholders and with the founders without like telling them what they need to build, just giving them information or sharing that, hey, this is something I learned today, post it in a public Slack channel, and do that every week. And over time, you're going to start building more respect. People will start coming to you for those insights or for soundboarding of things. The second action, so like speaking to customers and radiating information, kind of combining those two. The second one you can kind of focus on is just like so many people ship stuff and don't measure its performance 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months down the line. So look at all the things your team has shipped and go and get access to your analytics tool and try and quantify what was the actual impact of that feature that we shipped, and start bringing like data into, and that's something you can do post-out, like leave the current processes exactly as they are, just start sharing information around what is the outcome of these features we're shipping, and what is the impact of how we're delivering value to customers because of that. And the more you can do that, like both those actions, you don't need permission for, you don't need buy-in, like you might need access to the analytics if you don't have that, that learn how to use a Mixpanel or your product analytics tool, watch some YouTube videos, get up to speed with it, and try and find something interesting. Once a week, find an interesting insight about how people are using your product and sharing that. Like those little things go a really long way in changing the environment. It'll start coming up in meetings. People will start referencing it. Start shifting mindsets by just making that stuff more obvious. So that would be my recommendation. Make sense, Chad?
Jade, I don't know if you have a follow-up. Oh, good. Thank you very much. Oh, it's already 8 o'clock. I was going to say we still have the opportunity to take one more question, but it looks like we actually do not. So I would like to say thank you very much, Roger, for sharing this. I would also like to, I would request in the email that if you can share the slides for the presentation for the
I
session.
I will, but they're all like off the screen. So-
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So yeah, thank you so much for coming here, Roger. By the way, we have something planned in Q2 with Roger. So if you have not been attending sessions regularly, you definitely need to. You definitely want to for Q2. It's a series that is packed together. But yeah, that's as much that I can say about that right now. It's about making sure you get to that senior level or maximize your position in the mid level or senior level. I mean, if you're already there. But yeah, you would see more concerning that in the community. Yes, and if you have more questions, you can ask questions on the Slack channel, in the questions channel in the Slack group, basically. And Roger basically answers everything. So he's always there. So you can ask a question. Thanks so much, Roger. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming around. And see you in Slack.
Thanks,
And
guys. See you around.